You're listening to Capital and Country, where politics meets identity, where power meets people, and where we try to understand this land not just through policies and parties, but through story, memory, and who we are becoming. I'm Harrison Stewart. I'm a UN man. This podcast is where I step back and ask the bigger questions about nationhood, leadership, truth, and justice. Because Australia isn't just a place, it's a story, and stories evolve. And the 2025 federal election, that was a chapter we won't forget. Let's talk about it. What just happened in Australia is more than a political event. It's a cultural reckoning. Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party were returned to power, but not just returned. Elevated, strengthened, vindicated, a 55% two-party preferred vote, a swing of nearly 3 percentage points, a commanding majority in the House, seats fell to Labor that were never meant to be in play. Menzies, Deakin, Bass, Dixon. This is the first time a Labor Prime Minister has been re-elected with a clear House majority since 2001. Think about that. We are witnessing a shift, perhaps even the solidification of a new political landscape. And as I watched those results roll in, from suburban booths to inner city battlegrounds, I thought this is not just about parties. It's about who Australians now see themselves to be. Labor's big tent. Labor's victory wasn't just a win, it was a statement. Albanese cast the campaign around fairness, aspiration, and opportunity. Voters believed him. From city to suburb, from Braddon to Banks, people turned toward the Labor vision. Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, lost his own seat, Dixon. That's seismic. A sitting opposition leader defeated, the second in 2 elections. It's a moment that strips the aura from old power. The myth that certain men, in certain places, are untouchable, gone. Albanese, by contrast, walked through this election calm and controlled. He didn't overreach, he didn't rage, he spoke of values. That, it seems, was enough. He now governs with perhaps 86 seats, a number that rivals Kevin Rudd's 2007 landslide. But let's not confuse calmness with complacency. People voted Labor not for nostalgia, but for need, for help with housing, with groceries, with the sense that someone, anyone, in Canberra might finally see them. The coalition's collapse. Now to the other side, the Liberal National Coalition is in freefall, 40 seats. A party increasingly rural, increasingly male, increasingly out of step with modern Australia. Gone are the days when the Liberal Party held the cities. Melbourne, vanished. Sydney, reduced to the peripheries. Even in Queensland, their heartland, they've lost critical ground. Urban Brisbane turned red, and that wasn't by accident. Dutton campaigned hard on cost of living, yes, but also on fear. Fear of change, fear of migrants, fear of culture wars. But here's the truth, that fear didn't sell. Not in 2025. Not to a generation raised on climate marches and TikTok, not talkback radio. Dutton's departure opens a leadership void, but more importantly, it forces the Liberals to choose. Do they retreat further into the past or finally reckon with the future? Greens. Between influence and irrelevance, the Greens came into this election riding high, 4 seats, a growing Senate presence. But then came reality. 2 of their Brisbane seats, Griffith and Brisbane, gone. Labor swept in, helped ironically by Conservative preference flows. And now Adam Bandt's own seat of Melbourne hangs in the balance. A seat the Greens have held for 15 years. A seat that made them mainstream. A seat that, if lost, may force a total rethinking of their strategy. Bandt says, watch this space. But whether he wins or not, the Greens have been reminded. In a head-to-head with a resurgent Labor Party, there is no safe ground. The independents hold their ground. And then there are the independents. The so-called teals. They weren't a flash in the pan. Monique Ryan, Allegra Spender, Zali Steggall, they held their seats. In some cases, they increased their margins. Their message, climate action, political integrity, community focus, still resonates. This matters. It tells us the old tribal loyalties are breaking down. Voters want representation, not partisanship. They want local champions, not party hacks. The Teals get that, and they'll be here for the long haul. Let's pause now and ask the question this country too often avoids. Where did First Nations affairs fit into this election? The answer, tragically, is they didn't. Not in a meaningful way. Not in a way that speaks to justice. Not in a way that reflects the soul of the country we still claim to be. Ken Wyatt, former Minister for Indigenous Australians, and a Noongar, Yamatji and Wangi man, said it plainly. Peter Dutton's culture war politics helped cost the coalition the election, and not just because they were divisive, but because they were cruel. And voters, especially young ones, saw through it. Dutton doubled down after The Voice, on welcome to country, on flags, on symbolic gestures that hold deep meaning for many of us, and dismissed them as overdone. He condemned a neo-Nazi who heckled an Anzac Day welcome, but within days used that same moment to question why those acknowledgements exist at all. As Ken Wyatt put it, to be divisive on a cultural and socio-economic group that lives with disadvantage is not the way in which you lead a country. And yet that's where the coalition went. They misread the Voice referendum. Kos Samaras, one of the country's leading pollsters, said the Liberal Party projected its own biases onto outer suburban voters. They thought a no vote meant people rejected Indigenous rights, when in reality, it just wasn't the top issue. And Dutton's attempts to weaponise race only alienated the very voters he needed to reach. Let's call it for what it was, a Trumpian strategy, and it failed. But that doesn't let Labor off the hook. Thomas Mayo, a signatory to the Uluru Statement, called it what he saw: a retreat, a decision to walk away from bold reform, treaty, truth-telling, commitments made but not acted upon. In trying not to lose, Labor chose caution, and in doing so left many First Nations people disillusioned. Again, Senator Lydia Thorpe went further. She called Labor a covert racist party, accusing it of betraying the very people it claims to stand with. She pointed to rising incarceration rates, out-of-home care, and systemic failures still left untouched. "I'm tired of begging," she said. "Labor pretend to be our friends, but they stab us in the back every day." This election could have been a national moment of reckoning, a chance to centre justice, not just politics. But instead, Aboriginal affairs became a target, or worse, a silence, a void. And yet, there's a shift in the air. A mandate exists now, not just to govern, but to lead. Malarndirri McCarthy is now the Minister for Indigenous Australians. That brings hope to some, relief even. A change from Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, whose commentary, in the words of Ken Wyatt, Australia is still a country that hasn't made peace with its own history, a country where acknowledgements of country spark political outrage, a country where one major party ran from Indigenous reform, and the other refused to walk toward it. The next 3 years are a test, not just for policy, but for character, because we have been here before, and we remember. What does it all mean? This election tells a deeper story, one about generational change, about cultural change. The average Australian voter is younger, more diverse, more urban, less beholden to the political traditions of their parents. The Labor Party, for now, has understood that better than anyone. But governing is harder than winning. And with a majority in both houses, Albanese owns the outcomes, on housing, on climate, on inequality. He must deliver, not in slogans, but in substance. The coalition, it must rebuild. But more than that, it must rediscover purpose. What does a Liberal Party for the 21st century look like? That's the existential question they now face. The Greens, they'll recalibrate. They still hold power in the Senate, and they still speak to a moral imagination that many Australians share, particularly the young. And the Independents, they will keep challenging the majors to do better, to listen harder, to stay honest. In the end, this election didn't just reshape the parliament, it reshaped our story. It showed us that the Australia of 2025 is not afraid to break with the past, that we are, perhaps, becoming the nation we've long told ourselves we are. Fairer, more open, more honest. And that's what Capital and Country is here to explore. I'm Harrison Stewart. If you want more analysis like this, follow the newsletter on LinkedIn and subscribe to the podcast, available on all major platforms. Because this moment, this story, it's just getting started.